Hello, hello. I want to talk about some budget Universus today. And I was thinking rather than present, certain budget deck lists and say, hey, build this specific deck, maybe somebody doesn't want to play that character. They don't want to play that specific deck or whatever. So I figured instead I would go and highlight some individual cards. And in this video, I want to talk about common and uncommon attacks. And the idea behind starting here is that generally, if you're comparing, your deck just built out of whatever cards you have to something that you've, seen in the top cut of a major, usually that's the most striking difference is that, a lot of decks in top cuts these days, you'll see their attack lineup and, 15 out of the 20 attacks or something like that are ultra rare or higher, or, at least half of them, right? In a lot of cases. And that can be off-putting if you're just getting into the game and, maybe you don't think of yourself as a budget player, but you're not necessarily so competitive that you want to go back and spend, $5 or $10 per card on some singles or anything like that. You're one or two sets deep, you're looking back at this older card pool, it's very overwhelming. There's, 9 or 10 sets in standard right now, and it's just a lot to go through. Or you literally are just on a budget, right? And you can't afford to spend too much on the game, but you want to, make your deck a little bit better, have a somewhat more competitive time at locals. Even if you're not winning every time, maybe your deck stands a little bit more of a chance you take some more games, that sort of thing. And that attack lineup is usually the biggest gap. One of the hardest things to overcome when you're building a budget deck is making sure that you can actually kill people, because a lot of decks derive power from maximizing the attacks that they're playing, especially if it's a character that doesn't put a bunch of stats on everything, right? And it may be that the character you want to play doesn't put a bunch of stats and everything, and you really need, your deck to carry the damage and speed output load. And that's where your attack lineup is a big part of that. So I've picked 48 cards that are commons or uncommons from booster sets that are in standard. I have left out anything that comes in a pre-constructed deck. That could be a separate video. If people like this one, we could talk about pre-constructed decks in particular, but those cards aren't necessarily available as singles. It sort of depends on whether people have been, ripping that challenger deck for the bonus packs or not. It can really vary whether those cards are available for sale even at all, let alone, at a good price. Whereas your commons and uncommons from boosters are pretty much universally going to be, 50 cents or less. Maybe some of them press up a little bit closer to $1 or whatever, but it's not too big of a deal. And yeah, without further ado, I've broken these into a bunch of different categories. And first and foremost, let's talk about stuff that just lets you deal a lot of damage. And you'll notice a trend here. When you're shopping in the common uncommon big and you're looking for stuff that can do lots of damage, powerful is your friend. Basically anything with powerful 3 or better should be something that you give a look at. I've highlighted some of the better ones here. And we'll get to the other two cards last. We have, Levi chooses Irwin. It's just a powerful 4. That's just a really big powerful number. You don't see powerful 4 very often. That's all it does, but, it's all you need, right? You get some momentum, you find a way to land this thing. Maybe even playing it late in the string once they can't block anymore. You send this thing with a couple momentum for 13. That'll get you a good way to winning the game. All these powerful 3s are, have various forms of neat text on them. Thunder Spear Detonation gives you some refund, draws a card, sets up your next attack. Flurry of Blows just gets really fast. Thunder Spear Maneuver can also get pretty fast, not quite as fast as Flurry, but it starts with more damage. Learn Technique has this really cool unblock ability. All pretty handy ones to look at, good ones to pick up and just have in your pocket to slot into whatever deck. You don't necessarily need to be a direct momentum generation deck to play these. You don't need to be playing stuff that forces you to create momentum. That stuff can help, obviously. But you get momentum by, playing the game and finding ways to land moves, and you might need other cards to do that. You might need different shapes of cards that are going to land or whatever, but having some powerful in a pocket to, actually count to your opponent's health total when they leave themselves open is very, very useful. The other two cards here are the two I found that really scale higher than most others. Gusty Buffet, takes a little time. You need to build up a stage, but that +1 damage for each of your ready foundations when you play it. It could even be a 4 difficulty with that refund, but this thing's going to be 8, 9, 10 damage a lot of the time in the mid to late game, and that's a very good threat. Usually, a card like Buffet, you'll see, I don't know how often you'll see decks do it, but generally it's not a bad idea to have like exactly 2 low attacks and have it be a real one that you want to land, just to put your opponent in the complicated position of trying to figure out if they're supposed to hold low blocks or not. But you're only playing like 2 or 3 of them, and you might not even draw one if they do hold one. and just to like make them deal with it, right, can have some hidden value. As opposed to if you're playing like 7 low attacks, and some of them don't really deal that much damage, but they're going to hold low blocks, and they're just kind of going to have one a lot of the time. Usually with low attacks, because it's such a usually the least common block zone in most cases, you want to either play just a few of them or a lot of them and just overwhelm the amount your opponent can draw. It is generally the approach with those. So you'll see a bunch of attacks that are kind of on here because they're low for similar thought patterns. But Gusty Buff is definitely the biggest one. The other one, Lethal Rending, is kind of an all-in card. You blow up a whole bunch of your stage to get a 9 damage move on your 4 difficulty. It doesn't even block well. It's a little bit awkward. Obviously a little Mikasa themed who likes the high block modifiers, but outside of her, you can kind of just deal with having, the awkward block in your hand, or just like play it as a 5-3 and don't use the blitz if you need to. But, when you get that opening, late game situation, you're going to be able to land your next move. Here's 9. Right? That sort of thing can be very helpful with closing out a game. So these are what we call the bigger hitters that you can find in the common uncommon pool right now. And then another form of those that can also give you a lot of damage with one card are echo attacks. Now these lighter damage ones, you might want to have a character that's putting damage on things, or a deck that's playing some cards that put damage on everything. The Double Fist and Velocity Rush, but 4 difficulty echo that deals 4 damage is perfectly fine, actually. You have the momentum, you're going to get 8 total damage. It's split across 2 attacks. Your opponent might have a hard time blocking both. Double Fist even refunds the momentum. And then the other one, the sort of big meaty echo that you can find at Comes on Comes, is this Panzer Unit Mounted Fire. This is a 4 mid-6 echo, and the second one's a 6 mid-6. That is a good rate. That's one of those cards where a card might not see competitive play, not because it isn't good, but because it's merely 95% as good as some other option, right? And I don't know if Panzer Unit 95 is just a number of them throwing out there, but you can definitely find some good cards that aren't seeing play just because there's something a little bit better out there. And that's going to be true for a lot of, normal rares and even ultra rares that kind of end up in the bargain bin as well. But in the common uncommon space, Panzer Unit Mounted Fire is a very nice echo to have in your collection if you don't already. Onto what I've labeled as contributors. These are attacks that are kind of just there to deal a medium amount of damage, maybe threaten some stuff, make your opponent block something. A couple new turtle ones, holding all the cards, is a little dangerous if your locals has a lot of sweeping daggers at it, but if they don't, you get this 5 difficulty, usually a 6 high 6, can be a 7 high 7, can be, more, a little bit less depending on how many cards you're drawing. Just a nice, good, threatening opener. You see I've got a whole lot of 3 speed for 7 5 diffs. That's a pretty good stat line for a 5 difficulty move, and these have some ancillary effects on them. Horns can get a stun too. The Furious Engagement is actually a 5 high 7 if you lead off with it, and it has a 0 mid block, and Force of Surrender gets you a little freeze on the back end. Oh, pretty nice. I'm kind of known for having a soft spot for 5 difficulty 3 low 6, and when I was thumbing through these cards and we have 5 difficulty 3 low 7s now, I'm like, wow. That's a pretty respectable line. If you're thin on a collection, this is just what you have access to. These are perfectly fine cards to put in your deck. We've also got a couple of very slow for 7 4 difficulty low attacks. Same idea as Gusty Buffet. You play a few of these, or you just play a whole lot of low attacks and just tell them they don't have enough low blocks, so you didn't hold the low, you don't have enough lows, whatever, and just get a good chunk of damage in. Hell Spiders, just a nice 4 high 6 for 4 difficulty is just a good rate, and giving a speed to the rest of your moves on top in particular. You'll see some conditional 4 speed for 6 damage, 4 difficulty moves that just like if you jump through a hoop, you get 4 speed for 6. This is you get 4 speed for 6 for existing and speed up the rest of your moves. It's just the nicest version of that shape. And then Bending Blade is just kind of a cool one. 5, whatever zone you want for 6, they can't partial block. Kind of a tricksy card. Pretty neat one. The next category we have are throws and or slash. I put evasion on here because first and foremost on this list, the card here that you will see in a lot of competitive decks is Besiege, up in the top right here. This is a 3 difficulty move, 3 mid for 4, can only be blocked by cards with a printed block mod of 3 or greater. It can be very awkward. Your opponent feels like they're forced to try to hold +3 mid so that they can block this thing. If they don't, you get this thing in for some free damage. Obviously better if you put some damage on it, but these things are kind of in here to land, get some damage in, get some momentum. A bunch of different, pretty nice throws. A couple 4 difficulty 5 damage throws, that's a good rate. Close combat tackle, take something out, while it's in the process. Nebulous Stare is kind of funny. It kind of builds into a foundation afterwards. It's very easy to find attacks that share one symbol with your character these days because of Attuned. So it's pretty much always going to be a 3 low 6 that comes in, hits them for 3 if they block it, 6 if they don't, then comes down and it's a foundation. It's a pretty handy card that's seen some competitive play. I put Horse Toss on here. I'm not sure exactly in what scenarios you want to play a big dumb 6 difficulty 9 damage throw, but that is a very nice amount of damage for a throw. If you can afford some higher difficulty attacks, if the rest of your attack lineup is pretty cheap, play it through Horse Toss. Just say, like, I don't know, I'm going to deal 5 and then build, and I've done something on my turn, right? Line up the shot, a bit of a weird one. Only a throw if it's your first move, but it's a throw with a decent block and it has some keywords on it. Could be handy. Now the next group are comms on commons that can kind of help you generate resources, help you find cards, mainly in particular. To some extent, momentum. Playing throws is also good for generating momentum. It's just a bunch of nice cards you can play to try to find stuff, help fix your hand, get things going. Fiery Stare has seen some competitive play as a very often 5 mid for 7, which is a pretty nice rate that's filtering your hand a little bit. Speed Dash only draws on hit, but in a late game can draw you 2, has the X3, you can make it faster. Rapid Speed Slash, another conditional draw if you have momentum, can also make more momentum, also has the X3, also speeds up. Lizard Tail Splitter we might start to see a little bit more with some of these ninja decks liking the card pool flood. Forces your opponent to filter, which is often detrimental. Sometimes it helps them, but usually it's a bad thing to make them lose a card and draw a card, and puts the card in their card pool. So you're getting a pseudo 4 mid 4 that gets that double filter on it and gives you some kind of a deadlock threat as well. Hang 10 is a new one. This has some hoops on it. You have to be doing a fair bit of speed boosting, but if you are, this can be a nice way to manufacture a couple of cards and refund yourself any foundations you committed in the process. Kind of a neat little build around card. Titan Cliff is another competitively popular card. 6 difficulty is a lot, but so is discarding 3 cards and drawing 3 cards and building a 6 check from your discard pile. Provided you're running some, can make it a pseudo 5 difficulty, so that's actually a pretty good one. And Tavern Landing, if you are building face downs, and you might have some that are attacks in particular, but even if you're just like flipping face downs that have nice blocks and you're blocking with this thing and then picking up a block, that's a pretty handy effect. And this thing's an off zone. For some reason, I always thought that was a mid attack, but I'm looking at it now, it's a 4 high 4. That's not too bad. Next group is stuff that's sort of strictly defensive pieces that you can find on attack cards at common, uncommon. These are all sort of differently shaped. We have a couple new turtle cards that flip the opponent's attack after you block with them, which is sometimes very useful, sometimes doesn't really do anything. Sort of depends on if your opponent's deck it has things that count attacks in their card pool, or if they're really hoping for that attack to go to their momentum, or the attack has some kind of ability on it that they want to be live. Berserker Bite is a very effective defensive card. It's an expensive block, but when you block with it, you just make your opponent's stuff all have 1 difficulty for the rest of the turn, including their foundations, which is very, very nice. And if you do want to play it on offense, it is a little throw, so you can just like play it, get your momentum, and move on. Yusuke Spirit Wave just has the text Breaker 2 on it. You don't see Breaker 2 too much, especially at common and uncommon. It is a low block, which is, good and bad. Sometimes you like your breaker blocks to be mid just so that you can use it against anything, but it's there, it's handy. You can play it sometimes. Tentacle Grasp, play it once, you throw it, you get it in your momentum, you give their attacks -1 speed for the rest of the game. Or you give 1 attack a turn -1 speed, sorry, but that's still quite nice. Just that extra, basically, bonus foundation every round for your little throw that you tossed out there. And Red Counter is just a funny one. This is a little bit of an awkward fit in a deck because you're playing a 5 difficulty attack for a defensive ability, but you can play it, and if they don't block it, you can leave it in your card pool for their turn. It is an interesting trick, blocking with a card and now being able to shut down a damage boosting on an attack could be very hard to play around for some decks. Maybe more of a sideboard shaped type of card, but it's always been an interesting one that sometimes looks really, really good and sometimes it feels like a detriment in your deck. But one to keep an eye on. The next category I'm going to call counters and deadlock. Most of these are going to point at opposing foundations. Some of them are just deadlock abilities, some of them take out some other things. I realize I've put Close Combat Tackle on here twice, so it's 47 cards, it turns out. Close Combat Tackle specifically in this category makes your opponent commit 1 asset or backup. Very often people will only have 1 asset, and maybe they'll have 1 backup. So this actually like takes out their only one for the turn on top of being the throw. Biting Dagger just seals a foundation on play, including when you block with it. Disarming Swing can get rid of an asset permanently. You do have to land it. It is a low attack. It does have stun 1, so it's not a bad stat rate for something that can just like incidentally destroy an asset. Chair Spin is a new one from Turtles that's getting a lot of attention. 5 low 5 is a fine stat line for something that takes your opponent's 3 best foundations away. That is a very, very potent effect. Now you have to figure out what their 3 best foundations are, and if you're newer, that might mean you have to do like a whole lot of reading and thinking and kind of go in the tank on it a little bit. But yeah, taking out 3 of their good ones, it does have the caveat they do have to have 2 committed for you to ready to start with. So you might get in some situations where they didn't attack. If they're turtling up, right? No pun intended. If they're just like sitting there and defending, you'll need to like work a little bit before you can activate this. But it's very, very powerful if you do. And then underneath that, Young and Free is kind of a funny tech card. If they're just, burying the speed of all your moves, this thing says you can't do that. If they're trying to breaker you out of the game, this thing says I ignore breaker. The Unfreeze or Unseal won't come up too much pragmatically, but just that static is very interesting effect to have around. And then the other 3 cards are cards with very strong deadlock abilities that are good enough that your opponent might decide, I don't want to go to deadlock. If you have these, they might do it anyway. But they can definitely swing the game if they go into deadlock and you pull these guys out. And I think this is the last group I have. This is just something I'll call Tempters. These cards don't have clear, direct, always working value, but they kind of make your opponent's life a little bit difficult by making their blocking decisions weird. And sometimes they'll choose to block something at a point that is advantageous to you. Sometimes they'll take one of these because, they feel like you're trying to bait the block and just like, no, I'm going to take this. You just kind of make their judgment calls a little more difficult. And that can be helpful in fashioning in a lineup that's going to actually work. Nejire had 2 of these in Single Spiral and Spiral Wave Surge. Spiral's an interesting one. Letting you draw 2 and discard 2 is not something people very often want to do. But if you have some scary high attacks and powerful attacks or whatever to back it up with, you can start making them make sort of a decision on that. Wave Surge is almost the opposite. If you want to do this like deeper in a string and then threaten that, hey, if you block this, I might play something afterwards, as opposed to not. And it is basically a 4 mid-6, which is a fine stat line as well. Gory Stab shows their munch, and these things all sort of mess with your opponent's blocking or not blocking decisions. Throat Slitter is really awkward because this basically punishes them for blocking it because now they're down 2 cards instead of 1. It can be a good way to lead off a turn. Here's a Throat Slitter. People never want to block it. Just deal 5. Move on. Satchel Toss, just 3 low 5 is a fine stat line. The Stun 2's a little bit of something. It's a card people play sometimes and are pretty happy with. So that's it for this group, and I believe that is all. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope this was useful to some people out there that are a little bit overwhelmed and looking for some things that they can find for their deck for cheap. You could probably load all of these into a TCG player basket and be out like $20 just to have all of them, or something like that, just to have a base of cards to work with without having to go buy common uncommon playsets and then sort through them and figure out which ones are useful and that sort of thing. So let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything I miss, any commons or uncommons that you really like. Let me know if there are more of these that you want to see. You could do this. There's a version of this that you could do for rares even, right? There's a bunch of budget rares that are available that are like $1 or less. I could also do one that is talking about precons, right? Which precons are sort of the best bang for the buck if you're looking to augment a budget collection. That could be pretty interesting. So yeah, just want to see what the feedback on this is, and if nothing else, it can stand alone as a nice guide to some circa July of 2025, good commons, uncommons to go back and pick up. All right, thanks again. Have a good day.